Well, it was on this day, the 11th of November in 1975, the then Governor-General of Australia, Sir John Kerr, dismissed the Prime Minister, Gough Whitlam, and his government. The 45th anniversary of the dismissal is of great interest this year, given the release of the Palace letters back in July by the National Archives of Australia and the debate over the Queen's knowledge or not, influence or not, over the decision. Today, the Australians Paul Kelly and Troy Bramston's latest book, The Truth of the Palace Letters, Deceit, Ambush and Dismissal, was launched. Mr Paul Kelly joins me now from Canberra. Paul, thanks for coming on to talk about this and other things. Labor frontbencher Tanya Plibersek launched your book today, and she said, and I'll quote her, "One thing is clear to me, any campaign that seeks to trash the Queen is destined to fail. Even Republicans respect the Queen and will never accept her as a bogey woman." Well, that's an understatement if ever I heard one, but the debate around these letters, it hasn't fallen away, even though the release of the letters disproved many of the theories that the Palace was up to its eyeballs in the dismissal of Whitlam. Do you think it'll ever go away?
That's a good question, Peter. I'm not certain. I mean, we had all this nonsense about the CIA, which ran on for about 30 years before it started to fade away. And we've now got this nonsense that, the Queen was involved, or the Queen was implicit in Whitlam's dismissal, or the Palace encouraged Sir John Kerr to dismissal. This is not correct. That's not the Queen's behaviour. She's never behaved like that. And the Buckingham Palace letters make it absolutely clear that's not what happened. Will the mythology continue? Well, I guess it will for some considerable period of time, but I think in the end, truth will out.
I started off my show tonight, I guess, discussing the debate that's going on inside the Labor Party and how important it is to where Australia is headed, that it's about fundamental policy differences in this growing schism inside modern Labor. And the contrast over on the centre right, where you've got now, rantings of a former Prime Minister who was upset at his departure, but we're now a couple of years on and he's still as angry as he was on the day he walked out of that office. And also now the linkage of the Murdoch media and everything that's gone wrong, and not a sense of balance about the debate regarding free speech in all of this. Now, you had quite a clash with Malcolm Turnbull on Q&A. You absolutely held your own. I know what it's like to be at the end of that finger when he's going at you, and it was very public. Were you surprised at the strength of his feeling?
I've got to say, Peter, that I was a little bit surprised. I mean, I know that Malcolm Turnbull in recent times has been very agitated and campaigning very strongly about action on climate change in a way he didn't when he was Prime Minister, because he had to balance forces when he was Prime Minister. So I do understand that. But I think there's a real extreme element in the way he's conducting this campaign at the moment. And what I'd say in relation to the Q&A program is that for some reason or other he decided to personalise this in terms of myself. And the irony of this, as you pointed out about 10 minutes ago in your program, when Malcolm Turnbull was Prime Minister, I was pretty supportive of him in many ways. But anyway, he decided he wanted not just to personalise this issue in relation to myself, but to raise a moral issue and to actually start telling me, and obviously therefore implying that this related to other people, that we should quit our jobs, that we should quit our jobs to uphold the morality that he is demanding that we display. I think we need to be really careful. I think we need to calm down a little bit about all of this. And what I'd say about climate change is this is not just a moral issue. And no Australian Prime Minister can just treat climate change as a moral issue. It's an economic issue, it's an energy issue, it's a social issue, and frankly, any responsible Prime Minister will have to have a balanced policy that takes all this into account, and you are not going to be able to satisfy the advocates on either side of the political spectrum in terms of the polarised debate we have.
But it's also a debate, if you look at the electoral reality, that discounts, the hard left of the political spectrum, and that's certainly where the United States is, and that's the demand that seems to be growing inside the Labor caucus to sort of mimic what's happening in the hard left of the United States. It's not a debate where most of the electorate, and certainly the electoral test is there, that say for ordinary Australian families, it's the number one issue that must be tackled at great cost to their household budgets, above and beyond everything else. That's not true. That's not where we are. And if we look at the United Kingdom, and we've seen how under Keir Starmer, they've moved closer to the centre, away from where Jeremy Corbyn had them, and they've been rewarded handsomely in the polls against Boris Johnson. It shows that people are, particularly in this country, doesn't it, Paul? They want the environment dealt with seriously as an important issue, but they also want jobs and a standard of living, and they want, I think, the zealotry to be taken out of this issue.
Well, yes, Peter. Look, I think there are two really important points flowing from what you've just said. The first is, if you look at recent Australian elections, the party that's had the more radical pro-climate change policy tends to lose the election. And this does contradict the argument of a lot of the advocates that the key to electoral success is taking a very strong, forward-leaning leadership position on climate change. Well, election results tend to suggest that's not the case. The second point I'd make is that when it comes to public attitudes, you need to be very careful. The public's concerned about climate change. The public wants action on climate change. The public's concerned about bushfires. I mean, we know all this. But the question is, I think the public wants a balanced approach. The public wants to know that the action that's taken is not going to prejudice living standards, prejudice the cost of living, prejudice all sorts of fundamental economic concerns. So it's a question of how you strike the balance. And this comes back to the arguments being made by Kevin Rudd and Malcolm Turnbull. If you're in government, you have to strike the balance. There's no point them carrying on about Scott Morrison. He's got responsibilities that they once had, and they failed when they were Prime Ministers in terms of implementing their preferred climate change policy. And the fact of the matter is that any Australian government has got to try and get the balance right. And it's as though Malcolm Turnbull's forgotten about that and doesn't have to worry about that now. He's no longer in office and he's pursuing this campaign, and he's quite happy to personalise this front and centre.
It's about reputation repair, I think, for both of them, or an attempt, but I don't know that's working. Paul Kelly, thank you as always.
Thanks, Peter.